you pretty much had to know how to fight, or you would consistently get beat up, picked on, and robbed. And being a white kid in that area didn't really help either. And I always laugh when people say reverse racism. There's no such thing as reverse racism. There's just racism. If you don't like someone because of their race or their color or their ethnicity, you're a racist. and they didn't like me very much because I was white. So I pretty much, and I'm not a fast runner, so I had to learn how to fight.
Yeah.
And it just comes a time in your life when you get tired of getting picked on, and of course that turned me into a little bit of a prick myself, and I started being like, I started being like everybody else in my neighborhood. If you were a teenager in my neighborhood and you were a boy, you got into fucked up shit. You got into trouble. You were most likely you would join a gang, or you'd wind up, hustling, selling drugs, whatever. And a lot of burnt out buildings back then. Like I remember when I was a kid, they at all the dope spots, they'd have like literally they'd be selling smack out of the buildings, and the line coming out the front would like wrap around the corner, like around the block. And it was just business as usual. There was fucking junkies everywhere. A lot of crime, a lot of fucking crazy shit. So like when I came down here today to do this, and I'm just like, man, just a lot of really weird memories for me. I actually don't come down to this neighborhood at all unless I have to, because first of all, I have no business down here anymore, but it's still kind of, I got a little bit of PTSD, and it kind of makes me a little uncomfortable.
Well, you moved around a lot.
Yeah, I moved around a lot,
Yeah.
but I grew up on 12th and Avenue A back when I was little, when I was still going to school and stuff. And then, but I lived, all over the Lower East Side, and I lived in Williamsburg back when that was a real shit show. I lived in Harlem, the Bronx, pretty much every neighborhood that sucked. I lived there before it gentrified. I was like, I was like the testing pigeon. Like if he survives, some more white people will move in. But yeah, man, it was a fucking crazy neighborhood back then, man. It really was. And if you didn't learn how to use your hands, it just sucked that much worse.
Yeah.
I was living with my mom and her then husband until I was 14 or 15, and then I split, and then I was like living in squats and just like kind of bouncing around. And I hitchhiked out to the West Coast. I hitchhiked out to up north of Canada, and back to New York, and that's more or less around the time that I started my band, the Cro-Mags. And I had been playing music obviously my whole life and doing other bands and stuff, but that's really when I started laying down the groundwork for what I'm most known for, which is the Cro-Mags. No, and the Cro-Mags was it was more or less my journal, lyrically, musically. It was just what was coming out of me. I think the music really is an expression of the type of rage and anxiety and intensity that it was in my life, and the lyrics they're just real, they're about what was going on, living in squats and stealing food, shoplifting and mugging people and doing all kinds of fucked up shit, that was what my life was. So that was the ammunition I had to work with. It kind of sucked, no running water, no electricity. Most of the apartments didn't have like real walls. You had like parts of walls, and you had the wood, the plywood for that, just like part. It was It was a fucking burnt out building. I mean, if to you listeners, if you've never experienced what it was like to live in a burnt out building, imagine. You know, it was a burnt out building. There was no lights, no water, no fucking nothing. In the winter, it was cold as fuck. You know, you'd find a mattress on the street. You know, if someone threw out a mattress, you scored. You know, I'd sleep with my dog, and that kept the rats away from me. And you know, we knew all the. I knew what bakeries were throwing out their food on what nights, and you'd go and you'd get fucking hefty bags full of donuts and shit, and go back and fucking the squat, and everybody be eating donuts for the next few days. You know, it was just like a total, you know, urban Lord of the Flies fucking shit show, man. It was absolutely nuts. I mean, I'd be taking showers in the fire hydrant, you know, in February, you know, which is cold. And you know, literally shoplifting to eat. And you know, it was not easy, and it was you know, people like to romanticize all that shit. It was not great. But that's where the plot thickens, you know, because like my mom was a hippie, my dad was a dope fiend and an alcoholic. So even back to my earliest childhood, you know, before I was a year old, 2 years old, there was adults shooting drugs around me and overdosing, and I was staying in dirty apartments on, you know, that were like drug apartments. You know, my mom was a stripper, and shit was pretty fucking nuts. So it's, you know, I'm not gonna like blame my life on my mom or my dad, but I was pretty accustomed or prepared to deal with that type of life because I had already more or less experienced it in my earliest developing brain. So, you know, yeah, you get a lot of PTSD and shit, you know. And I also, like when I was young, back in the early 80s, I did some stupid shit, and I had a hit put out on me. And as it turned out, I found out years later when they did a documentary which is premiered a few months ago about me, and it's having another premiere in LA in February. Not sure where it's going to go to, you know, HBO or Netflix or who the hell knows. I'm not going to guess, but anyway, so I found out that it was like a $10,000 hit, which back in 1980, fucking two was a lot of money. You know, so like, you know, you figure you got to be a real fuck up at 15 years old to have a fucking hit put on you, like with that kind of money. That was probably, you know, that's probably close to 30 grand or some shit if you did the math.